The outgoing UN Commissioner for Human Rights has overseen a complex international situation in her 4-year tenure here in Geneva, and she joins me now on DW News. Thank you so much for being with us, Michelle Bachelet.
Happy to.
Let's start with Ukraine. The war has raged on for 6 months now. We've seen a litany of accusations against the Russian troops, against the Russian government, accusations of human rights violations. Recently, there's been reports of trials of prisoners of war. What has your office, or what does this office have the power to do to prevent such violations?
Well, the first thing that we do is, and we're doing it before the war, since 2014, we have a special mission there that has been reporting on violation of human rights, and we had offices all over Ukraine at that time, and we still have some in the Donetsk and in Odessa. So we have been reporting since the war started. We have been able to report casualties, the people who have been killed. We have, and we always report on cases that we can verify all the allegations. So we have been able to give to the press, but also the Security Council, the Human Rights Council, information that is reliable. I mean, of course, maybe it's not the whole information because it's the information you can get on the ground. And we believe that there has been more than 5,700 people killed and 13,477 civilians casualties. Of those, 780 injured, and of those, 1,000 children that has been killed. So it's a terrible thing. People have suffered so much. And we have been trying to do different things. We have been working, being on the ground, speaking out, informing the world these things that's happening, calling on the parties to stop, calling on Putin to stop the war, calling on the parties to respect the situation of prisoners of war. And we have been also trying to access. In Ukraine, we have had full access to the trials, and we have seen that how the trials have been developed, and if the prisoner of war has been having the respect they deserve according to the international laws. But in Russia, we have not, or in the pro-Russian armed groups controlled areas, we have not been able to have access to those. And we are really concerned because we have heard a lot of things about possible trials of a prisoner of war, because as soldiers, not as in the case of Ukraine, those prisoners of war has been charged with war crimes. And they have been doing through the domestic judicial system with all the normal proceedings. In the case of Russia, we have heard, it doesn't happen yet, but we have heard there will be sort of a special tribunal that will charge them because they have been part of the war, but that's against all international humanitarian laws. So we hope that these things are not happening. And we have been calling on respecting the humanitarian law, that they are part of those laws. They have ratified them, and to respect the prisoner of war.
Now, information, calls are all well and good, but justice essentially is one of the things that will need to be served in some of these cases. What's your opinion about that? How can justice be brought in the human rights violations relating to the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think, there's many different mechanisms of accountability, if I would say that. I think is one of the first steps to justice. Well, the first thing is to have the information. And that's one of the things that I have the evidence, it should be preserved. And that's one of the things we have called. And on the ground, our colleagues are working with the prosecutor's office, with everyone, calling to preserve the evidence, particularly when it comes to the ICC, for example. You need to ensure that the evidence can really be useful for the decisions in terms of a criminal investigation. And of course, this is something that they have received a lot of support from different European experts to be able to support the forensic activity and all the issues of the criminal investigation so the ICC can really do their job. But we also have another mechanism, that is the Commission of Inquiry of the Human Rights Council. That's not a criminal investigation because it's a criminal investigation who will define if there are war crimes or who has to be held accountable, which the perpetrators are, etc., etc. But the Commission of Inquiry will also be able to collect a lot of information that could be useful to the ICC or to any other, even national trials. And us, our special mission, we have been collecting from the beginning and we have not stopped. And that will also, it's not a methodology on criminal investigation, but at least it gives a lot of information that can be used by those who will try to ensure justice for the victims and their families.
In the case of the International Criminal Court's involvement and the investigations of the prosecutor of the court in The Hague, though, Russia isn't a states party of the International Criminal Court. Is all of this not completely toothless? They will never respect the judgments. They will never extradite people that are indicted by that court after this investigation, though. So what's the point?
Well, Ukraine is also not a part of the treaty,
exactly.
of the Rome Treaty, but they have accepted that these investigations will go on. There is an agreement between Ukraine and the ICC. Well, I think it will not probably be easy, but the truth can be known. And you know what? Many times it is not from one day to another, but then sometimes this is not something that people forget. And we just had, for example, in Sweden, there was a man from Iran who was involved in the massacres of 1988, and he was detained there and he was convicted. The other thing that can happen also is that so the most important thing I believe is to have the information, the data, but there will be different mechanisms. For example, if you see in the case of Myanmar, who's also not a member of the Rome Statute, the Gambia decided that there is universal jurisdiction on this and brought to the international tribunals the case. So even though some country is not a member, and so it's not as easy maybe that with the country as a member, and will not be wanted to cooperate, I think that justice can be brought. Maybe it will take some time, like it happened in the Second World War and others, but I think at least we have those mechanisms, we have clear international frameworks, and we have a mechanism to, I would say, identify the perpetrators of war crimes and to hold them accountable.
Now, you mentioned Myanmar there. Myanmar, it's 5 years now since the Rohingya minority the violence against them forced them to flee, 700,000 people. The reports of the situation on the ground in Bangladesh in the camps where they are staying, which you have visited, are frankly atrocious. Murder, gangs being operated there, gender-based violence, rampant crime everywhere. What is going on? How can this situation be improved when the human rights situation is so terrible?
Well, I mean, the first thing I want to say, unfortunately, in Myanmar, the situation has not improved. On the contrary. I mean, you saw that at the beginning it was against the Rohingyas, but afterwards, after the coup d'etat, the Tatmadaw started to repress violently all the people who were against the coup, all those young people calling for recognition of the result of the elections, but also they started identifying that that was not enough, because if the constitution didn't change, this will be over and over again. And today in Myanmar, we have a country who is not completely controlled by the Tatmadaw. There is this national unity government with the national defense forces they created. And there's also the Arakan army fighting the Tatmadaw. So it's really unstable, the situation, plus the huge number of people in famine, in need of humanitarian assistance. So why I'm saying that, having been in Cox's Bazar, it's true that those issues exist, but I mean, there is still, I saw camps well organized, people living in safer conditions, that if they go back home, of course not everything so, because we're talking about, 800 million people, 100,000 people, almost a million. In Basar Shar, that's the island where some people went there are only 40,000 of them. So of course it's difficult to take care of all those people, but I went and saw kids learning Burmese, learning mathematics. I met religious leaders, I met young people, I met women, and we discussed about all these difficulties and all these challenges. But let me tell you something. The majority of the people dream to go back. And they said, we need you to help us to go back. We need to be repatriated. And some of the people want resettlement. And these things were going on until COVID And then in COVID, everything, all these conversations stopped. And now I think it's a much more difficult situation. So I was talking to them, yes, I think the international community should do everything possible to urge the Myanmar administrative authorities to stop the violence against the people and to be able to create enabling conditions so people can be repatriated and go back. Unfortunately, I don't see it in the near future, and I think the international community should not abandon Myanmar, and the Rohingyas should continue paying high attention of this, because sometimes you feel that because other issues are seen more relevant, some countries have been forgotten. And I think this is the worst thing that can happen for Myanmar people who are having terrible grievances and violations of their human rights inside Myanmar, and also for all the refugees, Rohingya refugees, not only in Bangladesh, but in other parts of the world.
You say they're asking for your help, they're calling on you to do stuff. You're saying that the international community needs to stand up. What concretely needs to happen then? What could provide some ray of hope for these refugees in Bangladesh and for a resolution within Myanmar itself?
Well, the first thing is that I would say what we can do, what I've been doing, is to stand up, to be the voice of the voiceless, to advocate for the Rohingyas and against the Myanmar regime that is violating human rights. I've been calling the international community to be stronger. I think that there's many things that can be done, because ASEAN should play a more active role on that, because I think ASEAN is one counterpart that the Tatmadaw could listen to. And also the Special Envoy and Secretary General, Noelin, just went back last week there. But to be honest, sanctions have been put in, but I've been trying to identify which could be the incentives for the Tatmadaw to leave power, because now they have political power, military power, economic power. So I think we need to continue pressing them in a way that they understand that the only possible way is a transition to democracy and to leave the power and to leave it to the people.
Turning now to China, you have been under heavy, heavy criticism for a delayed report into the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang. People saying that the Chinese government has put undue pressure on other countries, massive pressure on your office. It's still a huge issue. What is the truth behind this? Why has this report taken so long to come out?
First of all, because this was an assessment, it's not mandated by the Human Rights Council, so there has no deadline or that we have to present it in some moment or another, but it had to be presented when it's ready, the first thing. The second thing is that, if you remember, in March this year, we get into agreement for a visit, my visit, but before that a technical group who will go into the ground and see all the places we should go and look at if all the guarantees were there so we could make a meaningful visit. And so that was the priority. In the meantime, our colleagues were continuing working on the assessment. Then we came back, and then we have continued working, reviewing, looking at what our findings in the visit were and in which way they could fit into the report. But then after that, we had a draft and we shared with the government, with the vision, and as we do with every country. We have had the same proceeding with China with any other country in the world, and then we had given them a normal time to bring back factual comments and to review them, and if appropriate, to include it on the report or to look at what those facts means. We have received recently big numbers of facts, comments, and we are reviewing it and looking at it.
How viciously or violently has the Chinese government opposed this report?
Well, they have done what every country does. They have sent a letter that has been publicly known, signed by them and like 40 or 50 countries, asking for the not publication. But I have to tell you, I have received so many other letters, meetings, interviews with other countries who want me to publicate it, and NGOs as well. So I have to say, we are working on this as we always do, with using the methodology of the Office of the High Commissioner, We have colleagues, lawyers who have a great experience on all these things, and pressures won't define what will happen with the report.
Amnesty International says that you have betrayed the victims in this situation, though, by delaying this report, and that your sort of statements after your visit were very weak. Do you feel that when you delay these things, you're betraying the victims?
Of course not. I mean, if you have to think that I did the first visit of a High Commissioner after 17 years, I had the possibility not only to speak out here in Geneva, but to talk directly to the Chinese authorities. And all of these concerns and allegations of violation of human rights, we have, and not only myself, because before I went, my colleagues were there for 4 weeks. And they also have meetings with ministers, with the judiciary system, and me as well, but they had long discussions with them on all of that. And at the end of the meeting as well, at the visit, we defined a mechanism of follow-up, and we define, for example, mechanism of looking at cases that are brought to our attention that their rights have been violated, allegations on that. But we also talk about having discussions, strong discussions on minority and human rights, on religious freedom of religion, human rights, on the BTCs, of course, and all kinds of on also business. I mean, all range of issues that it will help. It will help the people and the victims and their families.
Now, your predecessor, Zeid Ra'ad al-Hussein, was often accused of being way too hard on human rights issues and getting blocked out of certain countries. You, I think, broadly have been perceived as someone who perhaps, specifically on this China issue, has been acquiescent, perhaps not hard enough. Your term is up here. What is the right way for this office, this UN office for human rights, to be run?
Well, to be honest, I think it's unfair, that comment on China, because we have been speaking out on the situation in Tibet, in Hong Kong, etc. But okay, well, I would think it would be a shame if not only myself, because my work is also the whole office work, that we could look at only because through the lens of one country, when we have been dealing with hundreds of countries all this time, doing our best. But mainly, I believe of course, my successor will define however he or she wants to do it, but I truly believe this is a post where you have to be the voice of the voiceless, indeed, but you also have to engage governments, because it is the responsibility of governments and of the state organizations, governments, parliament, and of course judicial system, but government itself, to respect and promote human rights. So it's very easy to just speak, but maybe that doesn't change anything. I don't want just to be the speaker. When it's needed, I do it. Don't have any doubt of that, and I have done it. But mainly I want outcomes, because just to speak out and have no change, for me, is not enough, to be honest. So when every time I'm dealing with one particular issue, any country, I try to think which is the best and most smart strategy that will produce better well-being, better protection and promotion of human rights. That's my main. In some time, it needs to be speak out strongly, and we have done it. In some times, it's more diplomatic ways of doing it, or combination of many other things. So I think what is wrong is to believe that one size fits all. There's not one single way of doing with it. If somebody comes here thinking that it's only one way, it won't be successful. You need to look at everything, identify, know it very deeply, and think what works better for the people and for the human rights.
Now, moving on to Latin America, your home country of Chile, you're a former president of that country, is voting for a new constitution soon. Half of the population are predicted to reject it. How do you feel about that, and perhaps the responsibility of the government in a country that does need a constitutional overhaul?
Well, I hope the 4th of September is the election, the referendum, the vote, and I hope. I mean, first of all, let me say a couple of things. This has been a very important process. I did in my last government an exercise, if I may say, of a new constitution where 200,000 people participated, directly, we produced a draft, a bill, but that did not progress in the next government. So now there was this, I would say, demand from the citizens that a new constitution was needed. And I think that's something that not everyone, because some people were comfortable with the old constitution, thought this could be an important thing. 154 people were elected for the first time in the history, I think in the world, 50% of that women. And so it was a paritarian constitutional assembly. And they have been working in areas that never have been included before. Child's right, women's right. Can you believe that the other constitution never mentioned women's right at all? People living with disabilities, the indigenous people. I mean, we have even great grievances with the indigenous people. They have felt so much discriminated and marginalized and victims of many violations of human rights. And this constitution is addressing all those issues. It's not perfect, of course. I mean, it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect, and neither the current constitution, neither former constitution as well. But I think it's a great point to advance further. That's why I'm going to vote approve on the 4th of September here in Geneva.
As you say, it was, the old constitution, I mean, it was promulgated by a dictatorship, a military dictatorship.
Yes, it was Pinochet's constitution, even though I have to say during the democratic governments, there were some amendments, and some that were really important, but some of them never changed. For example, in the old constitution, it says that the state is subsidiary from the private sector. And it doesn't have the state sort of the more important role in terms of ensuring that there is a state of a social and that the state will ensure and where the rule of law will be ensured by the state. So the last constitution has a lot of problems, a lot of challenges, and of course they are interested behind that. So I hope people can realize that even if this draft that came is not perfect, it will permit advance. And of course, there's also discussions among political parties that if it's approved, there will be reforms on issues that maybe needs to be more accurately defined. If it's rejected, it's not clear exactly how it will proceed, but it looks like it could be a new convention, a new mechanism again. I hope it's approved, but it's the Chilean who will decide.
Turning to Nicaragua now, the Nicaraguan government has been persecuting political adversaries for years. What's your office done to highlight the crimes of the Ortega regime?
Well, we have done reports, monitoring always, and haven't done reports. We have done public statements. We have been calling for the release of the political prisoners from 2019, but also we have been very strongly calling for the release of all the political prisoners during the election time, where all the contenders of President Ortega were put into jail under different charges, and they're still there in jail under very bad conditions, many of them in very bad health conditions. And we are also concerned about the lack of civic space, the restrictions of so many NGOs. I mean, it's a huge number. Only almost 1,000 of different NGOs have been closed, and they're not permitted to work. There's right now there's no presence of any human rights mechanism, national or international, or if I would say inter-American, nothing. We are not there. We were expelled when we were there for some time, but we're working from Panama, where our regional office is, following all the information, and we receive the people who have been released from jail. We support them, and we're really concerned because now this widespread repression, it's also targeting sectors like the church. I mean, last week there was this bishop of Matagalpa who was detained with 6 other members of the church and many other people. So we see a widespread repression for many sectors that we see it's really dangerous, and we have been speaking out about that. Unfortunately, I think for a long time, Nicaragua was not given special attention by the international community, but right now we have a mandate a resolution of the Human Rights Council, where we have to present every once a while a report, and the next one we're going to present it on the next session in September, and calling for continuing, if I might say, monitoring and to analyze if other measures are needed.
There's been a sort of an agreement between the government of Gustavo Petro in Colombia and the regime of President Maduro in Venezuela. What's your opinion about this? Venezuela has been a really complicated country for many, many years now. Do you think that there is an unlocking there, some changes afoot?
Well, I think there's two things. I know that there was a meeting some days ago where there were people from the government, but also from the business community in Colombia with the counterparts, Venezuelan counterparts. And they were talking on opening the borders and also on the commercial ties. And I think this is positive. I always thought that countries who are neighbors need to have a discussion, a conversation, and need to find a normal way of relating, even if they disagree on things, because that's how it always happens in many countries of the world. And I think it's a very positive step. Let's see, I mean, we don't know the detail, we don't know how it will work, but I think it's a positive step to say, look, the way we were working, related before has not had good consequences. We should, as neighbors, try to identify what is positive for both, but also to address the challenges, because you know there has been a lot of migrants to Colombia. So I think it's a very positive step to look at that in that, if I would say, cooperative attitude. The other good interesting thing on Colombia and President Petro's announcement when he took office was about the change of the drug policy. They're going to look at it not only from a security perspective, but also as a social health perspective. And that's the way that the UN has changed its policy since some years ago. Before it was always look at the police issue and so on. Now we think it has to be much broader, and this will help a lot, because I think through the drug issue there has been a lot of, if I would say, impact on the most vulnerable people, Afro descent, the peasants, and the poorest. So I hope this will really help in solving many of the long-standing problems that Colombia had.
UN Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, thank you so much for joining us on DW News.
Thank you very much.